It was meant to be another flawless display of royal unity, a sacred ceremony steeped in centuries of protocol. Yet within minutes, silence swept through the hall as Prince George, the young heir to the throne, did something no royal child had ever dared. His words shattered the gilded calm and turned every pair of royal eyes toward him, including King Charles, who sat frozen, realizing history had just changed course. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The day had begun with ceremonial perfection. Every detail, from the ancient hymn to the rhythmic steps of the royal guard, reflected the precision of a monarchy built upon discipline. Yet behind the splendor, tension simmered. The ceremony was not just a tribute to Queen Elizabeth's enduring legacy. It was a test of continuity, a display meant to remind the world that the royal institution remained unshaken. But for Prince George, it was something else entirely. To him, it felt like a performance in which truth was silenced under the weight of expectation. He watched every gesture, every recited word, and though he remained still, his mind wrestled with something deeper, an unspoken defiance that would soon rise to the surface. The atmosphere was thick with reverence. Even the sound of footsteps seemed sacred as the royal family gathered beneath the towering chandeliers. Each royal member wore the same expression, poised, emotionless, duty-bound. King Charles sat solemnly, his face reflecting both pride and weariness, unaware that his grandson's quiet thoughts were already rewriting the script of the day. The Archbishop's voice echoed through the room, his tone heavy with centuries of ritual. He spoke of obedience, loyalty, and divine order, the same principles that had guided every monarch before them. Yet for George, those words didn't inspire devotion, they sparked questions. Questions about what it truly meant to serve. Questions about whether following tradition without heart still made one worthy of the crown. He had been taught from birth that silence was royal armor, that emotion was a private luxury, and that obedience was the price of legacy. But inside, a storm was brewing. The boy who smiled for the cameras, bowed for the elders, and memorized his future duties had begun to see cracks in the foundation. His father, Prince William, noticed the restless shift in his eyes, a flicker of the same spirit that once lived in Princess Diana. And as the sacred words continued to echo, that flicker grew into flame. Every royal present believed they were witnessing the perfect continuation of Elizabeth's reign, the ceremony that would bind the next generation to the old order. But in that very belief lay the irony of what was to come. They had overlooked the one truth that history often repeats: revolutions rarely begin with anger, they begin with conscience. And though George's lips hadn't yet moved, his silence carried the weight of defiance. Camilla, ever perceptive, sensed it, a subtle tension she couldn't quite define. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if reading a script no one else could see. The choir rose in harmony, the organ's deep chords vibrating through the golden walls. Every sound was a reminder of control, every note a call to conformity. But control, as history shows, is fragile. It takes just one voice, one honest moment to break the illusion. And George, standing amidst tradition's greatest stage, was about to become that voice. As the chamber doors closed and the ancient hymn began, no one yet knew that a single statement from a child would soon ripple through the very foundation of the monarchy. The silence wasn't planned, it was earned. As the Archbishop began the ancestral oath, George suddenly rose, his voice clear yet trembling with conviction. His words questioned not faith or family, but obedience itself. In a moment that froze every royal heartbeat, the young prince publicly defied the order that had bound his ancestors for generations. What began as a day devoted to solemn ritual now teetered on the edge of royal chaos. The Archbishop's words hung suspended in the air, interrupted by the unmistakable sound of defiance. Gasps rippled through the chamber, echoing like whispers of treason. For a moment, no one moved. Even time seemed to pause, as if the very walls of the palace were holding their breath. George stood tall, his youthful face pale but resolute, and uttered words that would soon be recorded as the most daring statement ever made within those hallowed halls, truth before tradition. 6 simple words, yet they carried the weight of centuries. The phrase struck like thunder, cutting through the silence and shattering the illusion of harmony that the royal family had so carefully cultivated. King Charles sat frozen, in disbelief, his eyes fixed on his grandson. Pride flickered deep within him, the recognition of courage, of conscience, yet it was quickly smothered by the gravity of what had just occurred. This was no mere childish outburst. This was rebellion, and in front of the most powerful figures in Britain. Camilla, ever the guardian of royal decorum, leaned forward sharply, her voice a hissed whisper of outrage. "This is unacceptable," she muttered, her composure cracking as she clutched the armrest beside her. To her, George's defiance wasn't idealism, it was danger. The monarchy, she feared, could not afford another figure who questioned its authority from within. William's heart pounded. He could feel the pull of 2 worlds tearing him apart, the father who admired his son's bravery, and the prince who knew what this act meant for the royal order. He had once challenged the system in quieter ways, but George had done what even he hadn't dared. He had spoken truth aloud, in public, against the crown's invisible script. The archbishop, uncertain of how to proceed, hesitated mid-sentence, glancing nervously toward the king for guidance. Never before had an interruption of this magnitude occurred during an official oath. The entire court seemed suspended between 2 breaths, the old and the new, tradition and truth, silence and revelation. Charles finally stood, the sound of his movement slicing through the stillness. His voice trembled not with weakness, but with an emotion too complex to define. He looked at George not as a monarch but as a grandfather confronting the face of the future. "Do you understand what you've just done?" he asked softly, his tone carrying both awe and fear. George's eyes, unwavering, met his. "Yes, grandfather," he replied. "I spoke what I believe the crown should stand for." That single statement pierced through the air like an arrow. It wasn't arrogance, it was clarity, and it unsettled everyone who heard it. Camilla's glare deepened, her whispers spreading quickly among the courtiers. Her disapproval wasn't just personal, it was political. Every look she exchanged with Charles screamed of the storm this moment would unleash. Yet behind the royal tension, something else was taking shape. A spark of admiration flickered within some of the younger royals, present a recognition that perhaps, for the first time in generations, someone had dared to question not the monarchy's existence, but its meaning. The archbishop cleared his throat, his hesitation now painfully evident. The ceremony had fractured beyond repair. What was once a carefully choreographed ritual now hung in chaos, all because a young prince had chosen conviction over conformity. The air felt charged, as though something sacred had been violated or reborn. Even those who disapproved couldn't deny it. The boy's words had power, the kind of power that transcended age, title, and fear. William lowered his gaze, hiding a storm of pride and dread. He knew that history was already being rewritten, and it would remember this day not for its ritual but for its rupture. Yet behind every act of rebellion lies a story, a reason forged long before the moment itself. It was an inheritance not of title, but of truth, one passed down quietly through generations, from a woman who had once dared to love the people more than the palace itself. But the question wasn't just what George had said, it was why he said it. That answer, buried beneath layers of royal secrecy, began decades before his birth. Behind George's defiance lay the echo of another rebel heart, Princess Diana's. Though she never met her grandson, her spirit lingered through the stories whispered by Catherine and Anne. George had grown up hearing that royalty meant humanity first, that his great-grandmother's compassion was greater than her crown. And now, standing before the monarchy, he was channeling that very truth. Diana's legacy was not written in titles or jewels, but in the quiet revolution she inspired. She taught the world that a royal could feel, that kindness could break barriers where status could not. For years, the monarchy tried to confine her story to photographs and charity archives, but her influence endured, uncontainable and eternal. Catherine understood this better than anyone. She had watched the same institution that silenced Diana, now trying to mold her son into another obedient heir. But Catherine refused to let George grow under the shadow of fear. At night, away from the cameras and courtiers, she would tell him stories of the grandmother he never knew of, a woman who reached beyond marble walls to hold the hands of those society had forgotten. To George, these weren't bedtime tales. They were lessons in courage. Anne, too, played her part in shaping his conscience. Known for her discipline and sharp honesty, she became the bridge between old duty and new conviction. Where others saw protocol as sacred, Anne saw it as a structure that must serve purpose, not power. She spoke to George of duty, but she redefined it. "Serve the people, not the pedestal," she once told him. Those words stayed with him, merging with Catherine's softer teachings to form an inner truth that to honor the crown was not to protect its image, but to restore its soul. As George grew, so did his awareness of what the monarchy had become: polished, distant, mechanical. The rituals, the rules, the endless speeches about unity that masked division, all of it gnawed at his young conscience. He saw his father's silent battles with duty, his mother's graceful restraint under scrutiny, and somewhere deep inside, the ghost of Diana's rebellion whispered that silence was no longer strength, it was surrender. George began to believe that the true weight of the crown wasn't in its gold, but in its purpose, and that purpose had been forgotten. William watched all of this unfold with a mix of pride and fear. His mother's influence still lived inside him, buried under decades of royal conditioning, and now, through George, it was being resurrected. The boy's words during the ceremony, "truth before tradition," felt like Diana speaking again through a new generation. William remembered the pain of his childhood, the endless conflicts between heart and duty, and wondered if his son was destined to face the same cost. Yet, he couldn't deny it in George's defiance. He saw hope. George's rebellion was not born out of arrogance, but out of inheritance, an inheritance of empathy. He didn't wish to destroy the monarchy, he wished to redeem it. In his heart, he carried a vow to restore meaning to the crown, to make it something more than ceremony. But every legacy has its counterforce, and as Diana's spirit guided him toward reform, another presence within the palace, colder, older, and deeply entrenched, began to stir. It was the voice of tradition, sharpened by fear, preparing to silence the echo of Diana once and for all. But as Diana's ghost inspired him, another shadow, colder and far more dangerous, was preparing to strike back in defense of tradition. No one expected Queen Camilla to remain silent, and she didn't. In the aftermath of George's stand, she demanded an immediate audience with King Charles, claiming the child's actions had humiliated the crown. Her words were sharp, laced with both fear and fury, revealing the fracture within the royal circle, a power struggle between the old guard and the rising voice of a new generation. Camilla's anger was not just about a child's disobedience. It was about the unraveling of order, the same order she had fought so hard to preserve since stepping into the role of queen. To her, George's outburst was more than a breach of etiquette. It was an omen. A reminder that the ghost of Diana still haunted the monarchy, resurrected now in the defiant, the spirit of a boy too young to understand the dangers of defiance. She accused Catherine directly, her words echoing through the private corridors of the palace that the Princess of Wales had encouraged rebellion under the guise of compassion. Catherine, dignified and calm, refused to retaliate. But within her silence was strength, a quiet confidence that only infuriated Camilla further. Charles, caught between two worlds, sat in silence as Camilla's accusations poured out. He wasn't just a king in that moment, he was a father and a grandfather torn apart by guilt. He saw in George the idealism he once buried beneath royal duty, and in Camilla's rage, he heard the echoes of a system that had already destroyed too many hearts before his. Every word she spoke twisted deeper into that unhealed wound. Yet even as she demanded that discipline be restored, Charles hesitated. He wasn't sure if punishing George meant restoring authority or extinguishing the only light of truth left in the monarchy. Behind closed doors, palace aides whispered about constitutional breaches and public consequences. The mere suggestion that an heir had defied a sacred oath sent shockwaves through the institution. Memos were drafted, meetings called, and strategy papers circulated under the banner of damage control. The monarchy had survived scandals, divorces, and betrayals, but never something like this. Never a moral revolt from within. Every whisper added fuel to Camilla's fury. She viewed the murmurs as proof that Catherine and her son had compromised the crown's dignity. The divide between the king's household and the Wales family deepened overnight, turning private corridors into silent battlefields. And beyond the gates, the world had already begun to listen. Word leaked to the press carefully at first, then uncontrollably. Headlines hinted at tensions within the royal family. Tabloids speculated about a shocking confrontation, and commentators debated whether the crown could withstand another internal war. Each rumour painted a different villain, yet one theme persisted. A young prince had dared to speak truth in a place built on silence. William, meanwhile, made his choice with a clarity born from pain. He would protect his son, no matter the cost. He had seen what the system had done to his mother and refused to let history repeat itself. To him, George's defiance wasn't a scandal, it was evolution. And if that evolution threatened the old order, then so be it. In the quiet of night, he resolved to shield his family from whatever storm Camilla or the courtiers might unleash. Yet while the palace argued in private chambers, the world outside had already begun to take sides, and the reaction was unlike anything the monarchy had ever faced. As news of George's act spread beyond palace walls, something remarkable happened. The public didn't see a child breaking rules, they saw a leader in the making. Streets buzzed, hashtags trended, and across the Commonwealth people whispered the same question. Had the monarchy just witnessed its rebirth through a boy unafraid to challenge its very code? By the next morning, the entire world knew his name. The boy who defied the crown became a global headline, an image of youthful courage challenging centuries of silence. The palace had expected outrage, condemnation, perhaps even ridicule. Instead, the opposite unfolded. From London to Sydney, from Toronto to Cape Town, people found themselves drawn to this moment of raw honesty. To them, George's act wasn't rebellion, it was revelation. A young prince had broken through the glass wall that separated the monarchy from the people, and in doing so, he reignited something long dormant. Belief. Public sympathy poured in, much of it tied to one name, Diana. The late princess's legacy shadowed every word written about her grandson. Commentators called him Diana's echo, a living continuation of her empathy and conviction. Photos of George beside his mother, Catherine, circulated online alongside images of Diana embracing children and comforting the sick. The resemblance wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The same compassion, the same refusal to hide behind formality, now lived again in her grandson's voice. To millions, it felt as if Diana's dream of a monarchy led by conscience rather than control had finally found its champion. But admiration came with tension. Within the Commonwealth, political analysts and social commentators began to dissect the act with the precision of historians. Some called it the birth of modern monarchy reform, a symbolic shift that could redefine royal authority. Others warned it might ignite dangerous expectations, suggesting that if an heir could question tradition, so could the people. Governments subtly weighed the implications. Diplomats whispered about constitutional cracks forming beneath the glamour of royal unity. It was no longer just a family story, it was an institutional reckoning. The generational divide was unmistakable. Young people saw George as a hero, the embodiment of truth in a world tired of pageantry. They filled forums and feeds with words like hope, change, and humanity. But the older generation, fiercely protective of the monarchy's mystique, saw something else: instability. To them, the crown's power was built on obedience, and obedience had just been broken by a child. For every voice celebrating George's courage, another lamented the erosion of respect. The monarchy, long a symbol of order, now faced a future built on questions rather than commands. Inside the palace, advisors scrambled. Meetings stretched late into the night as press officers drafted statements to contain what they called a misunderstanding of youthful expression. They sought to reclaim the narrative, but the tide was too strong. Every attempt at control only amplified the story. Silence from Buckingham seemed like admission. Any defense sounded like suppression. For the first time in decades, the palace found itself chasing public opinion rather than shaping it. And through it all, William and Catherine stood at the center of a storm they neither planned nor feared. Pride flickered in their hearts. Their son had spoken from truth, not arrogance. Yet beneath that pride lay a deep unease. They knew too well how the institution could turn on those who challenged it. William remembered the price his mother paid for daring to speak her mind, and he feared that George, still a child, might bear that same weight. Together, they resolved to stand united, even if it meant facing the wrath of tradition itself. But as admiration grew among the people, inside the palace, George's defiance was being reinterpreted not as courage but as threat. Within the marble corridors of Buckingham Palace, a hidden circle of senior courtiers convened men and women who had served since the Queen's reign. They called themselves the custodians of continuity. To them, George's boldness wasn't bravery, it was betrayal. And as they drafted secret memorandums and whispered about corrective measures, a chilling truth emerged. The monarchy would not allow another Diana moment, no matter the cost. Behind closed doors, the council's words carried a cold precision. Their mission was simple: to protect the crown from sentiment, from vulnerability, and from the unpredictable power of public sympathy. They believed that emotional openness, no matter how noble, was poison to the monarchy's survival. George, in their eyes, had inherited the same dangerous charisma that once threatened to reshape the institution from within. And that could not be tolerated. Within hours, quiet orders began circulating through the palace network. Damage containment, narrative correction, and, if necessary, disciplinary oversight of the Wales household. Memos were written in careful language, cloaked in the guise of stability management. Some proposed quietly removing George from certain public duties. Others suggested restricting Catherine's influence over his education. The idea wasn't revenge, it was control. Yet for those who still remembered Diana's fall from royal grace, the pattern felt hauntingly familiar. This time, however, they would not wait for the storm to reach the tabloids. This time, they would strike first. One of those internal documents, never meant to be seen outside the circle, found its way into the hands of Princess Anne. It was a single-page summary, but it said, "Enough." Her eyes scanned the words, and disbelief turned to anger. Anne had seen decades of royal politics, but even she was shaken by how far the custodians were willing to go. To label a child's honesty as insubordination, to treat truth as instability, it was everything Diana had once warned them against. Without hesitation, Anne sent for William. When he arrived, she handed him the document in silence. His face drained of colour as he read the proposal that called for reviewing the prince's future engagements in light of his recent deviation from royal conduct. The confrontation that followed between William and a senior aide was unlike anything the palace had seen in years. William's restraint broke. He accused them of using fear to maintain control, of repeating history under the pretense of protecting tradition. The aide, cold and calculating, reminded him that personal emotion must never outweigh institutional order. The words struck like a blade. For the first time, William saw not just a system built on loyalty, but a machine built to crush anything human that dared to feel. He left the meeting with one thought echoing in his mind. They would destroy George before they ever let him change the crown. Anne, meanwhile, stood her ground. In private conversations with Charles, she spoke not as a princess, but as a sister who had lived long enough to see the same mistakes repeated. Her defense of George was unwavering. She told Charles that silencing truth now would be the death of everything the monarchy claimed to stand for. Her voice was steady, but her words carried an unspoken warning. If he allowed this council to dictate the future, he would lose not just his family's loyalty, but the nation's faith. And as whispers of control and rebellion collided within those palace walls, Charles himself grew more haunted. Each day he found it harder to separate the king from the man, the monarch from the grandfather. He could no longer escape the question echoing through his mind: had he inherited the throne only to repeat the same cycle of secrecy and pain that once consumed his mother's legacy? As the custodians prepared their quiet retaliation, one royal heart was already shattering under the weight of legacy, and love the king himself. For King Charles, it wasn't just about order, it was about reflection. Alone in his study, he replayed George's words, realizing they mirrored his own forbidden thoughts from decades earlier. Torn between preserving the system and embracing the truth his grandson embodied, the king faced a torment only a monarch could know. What if the future demanded the death of everything he had spent his life defending? The silence of the palace weighed heavily upon him. It was the same silence that had followed him since youth, the silence of duty, expectation, and unspoken sacrifice. Every portrait around him seemed to judge him, to remind him that his life had been spent in service not to himself, but to an institution built long before he was born. Yet now, in that very silence, came the faint echo of a child's voice. George's voice asking the question Charles had buried deep within his soul. What is the purpose of the crown, if not truth? The memory struck like lightning. He was transported back to his own youth, to moments of quiet rebellion against the same rigid traditions that now imprisoned him. He remembered the frustration of being told what to think, how to feel, when to speak. There was a time when he, too, had dreamed of modernizing the monarchy, of blending compassion with power. But that dream had been buried under years of royal obligation and the suffocating weight of expectation. Looking back, he saw in George everything he once hoped to be: unafraid, unbound, unapologetically human. And that realization cut deep. Camilla's presence only intensified the storm within him. Her words were relentless that order must be maintained, that public dissent from within could destroy the monarchy's credibility. She reminded him of his duty, of the delicate line between empathy and weakness. But beneath her logic, Charles felt guilt clawing at his conscience. He had promised himself, long ago, that Diana's pain would never repeat itself. Yet here he was, standing on the edge of the same precipice, another generation, another heart being crushed by the same machinery of power. The irony was cruel. The very throne he had spent his life protecting was now the thing threatening to consume his family. That night, he sat at his desk and took out a blank piece of parchment. His hand trembled as he began to write not as a king, but as a father, a grandfather, and a man haunted by the ghosts of his choices. It was a letter to William, simple yet profound. In it, he wrote of his regrets, of how he had once questioned the same rules George now defied. He admitted that perhaps, in all his years striving to uphold his mother's legacy, he had misunderstood her greatest lesson, that strength was never about silence, but about courage, in truth. The letter ended with a plea, not an order. Protect him, let him speak. He may be the one who saves what we could not. As the ink dried, Charles felt the gravity of what he was about to do. He knew that silence was no longer an option. The monarchy was standing at a crossroads, and the path he chose next would define not only his reign, but the very survival of the crown. He could either cling to tradition or embrace transformation, and in doing so, honor both his mother's legacy and his grandson's conviction. The choice was devastatingly clear. And then came the announcement, one that would shake the monarchy once again, as the king decided to turn the sacred ceremony into a defining royal decree. In an unexpected royal address, King Charles stunned the world by reopening the sacred ceremony, this time at George's request. Cameras rolled as the young prince stood beside his grandfather, rewriting the very words that once silenced him. Together, they pledged an oath not of superiority, but of service, signaling the most symbolic shift in modern royal history. The decision came like lightning, swift, shocking, and utterly transformative. After weeks of casa, speculation, silence, and division, the king's announcement carried a tone of reconciliation rather than power. In a public statement that captivated millions across the world, Charles declared that the monarchy must renew its purpose for a new age. The declaration itself was revolutionary. It was not born of strategy, but of sincerity. A king, humbled by his grandson's courage, choosing to listen rather than rule. For the first time in his reign, Charles did not speak as an untouchable sovereign, but as a man who had finally understood the difference between authority and leadership. The reinstated ceremony was unlike any before it. There were no extravagant gestures, no rigid protocol dominating the moment. Instead, it carried an unmistakable stillness, the kind that precedes change. George, standing beside the king, held the revised text of the ancient oath one he had helped craft. The new words replaced centuries of distant reverence with something deeply human, a vow of unity, compassion, and accountability. It was a promise that the monarchy would serve the people, not the other way around. Every line spoke of evolution, not preservation, and as Charles recited the final passage, his voice firm but filled with emotion, the audience could feel that something sacred had been restored. The reaction was instant. Across Britain and the Commonwealth, tears and applause erupted simultaneously. For many, this was the moment they had long waited for, a sign that the monarchy had finally learned from its past. Commentators called it the rebirth of the royal conscience. Streets filled with emotion, and even skeptics admitted that the gesture was profound. The young prince, once seen as a symbol of disobedience, was now hailed as the catalyst of renewal. George had done what generations before him had feared. He had transformed the meaning of monarchy without shattering its foundation. Yet, not every face in that grand hall carried joy. Camilla's expression told another story. She sat composed, but the unease beneath her poise was unmistakable. For her, this moment felt less like triumph and more like surrender, the quiet erasure of an era she had fought to define. Every word of the new oath, though beautifully spoken, was an unspoken rejection of the traditions she had defended. Her eyes never left Charles, as though silently asking whether this was still the monarchy she had once dreamed of helping him preserve. Meanwhile, William and Catherine watched from their seats with quiet pride. They had endured weeks of uncertainty, of whispers and scrutiny, but now they saw the reward of patience. Their son's conviction had not only softened the king's heart, but rekindled his faith. Beside them, Princess Anne's approving nod said it all, a gesture of both closure and beginning. She knew, perhaps better than anyone, that the baton of moral leadership had passed from one generation to the next, not through decree, but through courage. The applause that followed was thunderous, the emotion indescribable. Yet beneath the wave of celebration, there was a silence, a private act that no one in that grand audience saw coming. Because while the cameras captured the smiles, something deeper was about to unfold, an act so personal, so quietly powerful, that it would seal the meaning of this day forever. But even as applause filled the air, one final act unseen by the cameras would seal the meaning of this day forever. After the ceremony, George slipped a sealed envelope onto the altar addressed simply, "To the people of the Commonwealth." No one knew its contents until weeks later, when it was revealed to contain words that mirrored Diana's handwritten letter from decades ago. "A crown without compassion is only metal." With that, George's defiance became destiny, and the monarchy reborn. The discovery of the letter came quietly, yet its impact was seismic. A palace aide, tasked with clearing the remnants of the sacred ceremony, found the envelope nestled beneath the royal crest. No insignia, no signature, only those 6 words written with the steadiness of conviction. When its existence was finally confirmed and shared publicly, it sent shockwaves through the world. Commentators called it the second great message, a modern echo of Diana's moral thunder that had once shaken the monarchy to its core. Yet this time, the message wasn't from the past, it was from the future, written by the heir who had learned not from the rules of royalty, but from the lessons of conscience. The letter's contents revealed a depth of maturity that seemed far beyond George's years. He wrote of unity, of service without privilege, and of a crown that must serve hearts before history. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. People wept openly as the words were read on live broadcasts. Across continents, murals appeared bearing the quote, and the phrase became a rallying cry for a renewed sense of purpose in leadership. For the first time in decades, the monarchy was not seen as an untouchable relic, but as a living, breathing institution capable of humility. The young prince's quiet act of sincerity had done what no decree, speech, or royal tour had achieved. It restored faith. Inside the palace, the response was more complex. Camilla, who had watched the tide of sympathy turn toward George, began to retreat from the public eye. What had started as frustration had turned into resignation. The world no longer looked to her or even to Charles for direction. It looked to the child who had dared to question power and redefine it. Her final appearances as queen consort were subdued, her silence speaking louder than any statement could. She understood, perhaps painfully, that history would remember this as the turning point, the moment the torch truly passed. Not by succession, but by spirit. Charles, however, was consumed by a different kind of emotion. Late at night, he watched the replay of George's address and the reading of the letter again and again. His eyes lingered on the words, "A crown without compassion is only metal." And every time, they brought tears. It was as though Diana had spoken through their grandson, her voice returning not as rebellion this time, but as redemption. The king knew then that his reign would end differently than it began, not with grandeur, but with grace. His heart, long torn between duty and regret, finally found peace in the realization that George's courage had accomplished what his own restraint never could. As weeks passed, the monarchy's image transformed. Newspapers that once called it outdated now described it as renewed. The crown was no longer a symbol of distance, it had become a reflection of the people's will. For the first time in modern history, the monarchy's greatest strength lay not in authority, but in empathy. And at the heart of that transformation stood a boy who had proven that compassion could carry more power than any scepter. The people began calling him the Prince of Conscience. It was a title born not of bloodline, but of belief. Belief that truth and tradition could coexist, that kindness could stand beside crown. It was the legacy Diana had dreamed of, Charles had feared, and George had finally fulfilled. And though the boy himself said little afterward, his message lingered in every heart that heard it. A reminder that even in the most ancient of institutions, humanity could still triumph. And so, from rebellion was born renewal, a single voice rewriting centuries of silence, leaving behind one truth that no crown could deny. The future of royalty now speaks with a child's courage. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.